Berlin, 1943. Night had swallowed the city like a dark ocean, leaving only the distant glow of fires and searchlights to cut through the smoke. Rain-slicked streets reflected the harsh neon of propaganda posters, swastikas staring down at the passers-by with frozen authority. And somewhere in the maze of alleys and abandoned factories, a man moved like a shadow, silent, careful, and utterly unremarkable. He had no name here. No past. Just the careful rhythm of his boots against wet cobblestones, the muted clink of the equipment under his coat, and the sharp edge of fear at the back of his neck. Every step carried the weight of 1,000 possibilities: capture, betrayal, or death. And yet, he moved forward. For weeks, he had watched, listened, and memorized the routines of the Nazi hierarchy in Berlin. The guards' rotations, the timing of the sirens, even the peculiar way officers licked their stamps before sealing envelopes. Each detail was a thread, and he was slowly weaving the map that would let him enter the lion's den. A clock tower struck midnight, and he paused under a flickering lamp, pulling a piece of paper from his pocket. On it were the words, Schloss mit, 3rd floor, West Wing, 2200 hours. The documents are here. He tore the note slowly, letting the fragments fall into the rain, washing away any trace. One mistake could cost him everything. He tucked the remaining fragments back into his coat, took a deep breath, and slipped into the shadow of the next building. Berlin's streets had become a battlefield of subtlety. One wrong glance, one accidental step onto a puddle, one hesitation, and the Gestapo would descend like wolves. He had trained for this for months, learned the habits of those around him, and yet, the city itself seemed alive, sensing him, testing him. Ahead, the grand silhouette of Schloss Mitte rose against the night sky, its Gothic towers illuminated by the faint light of burning rooftops. He remembered the first time he saw it from a distance: imposing, unyielding, a fortress of secrets. And now, it would be the stage for his most dangerous act. He approached a side entrance, where a lone guard stood, cigarette dangling from his lips. The man scanned the street idly, not suspecting the figure merging with the shadows. With precise timing, the spy stepped from the darkness and barked in a voice he had rehearsed for weeks, "Lieutenant Muller reporting for late-night inspection." The guard blinked, startled, then nodded. "Go ahead," he muttered. A minute later, the spy was inside, heart pounding, but mask firmly in place. He moved quickly, memorizing the layout, noting the creak of each floorboard, the exact location of stairwells and elevators. Every corridor was a potential trap. Every officer a potential enemy. On the 3rd floor, the West Wing, he found the office. The door was slightly ajar, as instructed, and inside, a pile of documents waited, stacked neatly under the harsh light of a single lamp. The spy approached carefully, pulling gloves from his pocket. Each page he examined, he scanned for codes, maps, and names, information that could change the course of the war. Hours passed like minutes. Outside, the city continued its restless rhythm, unaware that a single shadow could tip the scales. And then, just as he finished photographing the last page with a tiny camera hidden in his sleeve, a soft sound echoed behind him: a shuffle, a whisper of movement. He froze. From the darkness of the doorway emerged a man in officer's uniform, tall, precise, and calm. The spy's heart pounded, but his face betrayed nothing. "Who are you?" the officer asked, voice low but authoritative. "A supply clerk, sir," he replied without hesitation. "Assigned to organize these files tonight." The officer stepped closer, eyes narrowing. He smelled the rain on the spy's coat, noted the tension in his shoulders. Strange, I wasn't informed of any clerk coming tonight. The spy smiled faintly. Orders come directly from Berlin Command. Special task, sir. The officer's gaze flicked to the documents. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. I'll be watching. Don't step out of line. The spy's pulse surged, but he stayed calm. Understood, sir. After what felt like an eternity, the officer turned and left. The spy exhaled silently. Every second now was a thread pulled taut over a pit of knives. But the critical task was done, the documents had been secured. All that remained was extraction. He retraced his steps, leaving no trace, each move measured, silent, almost invisible. Outside, the rain had intensified, masking the sounds of his escape. He melted into the streets again, another shadow among many, unseen, unremarkable but carrying secrets that could alter the war. Hours later, he found a safe house, abandoned except for a few crates and the faint smell of damp wood. He lit a small lamp, and for the first time that night, allowed himself a moment to breathe. The photographs, the notes, the stolen intelligence, all of it lay before him. And yet, relief was fleeting. Because in a city like Berlin, nothing stayed secret for long. And somewhere, in the maze of alleys and silent rooms, someone had already noticed a shadow moving where it shouldn't. He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the night. He had entered the heart of enemy territory, and survived. But the true test had only begun. For spies are never safe, even in the dark, and the war of shadows is far from over. Outside, the wind carried whispers from the streets, and he knew the moment he stepped out again, he would become part of the city's secrets, a phantom crossing Berlin, a shadow without a name, and a man with a deadly purpose. Into the lion's den. The city was still when he stepped out of the safe house. Dawn had yet to touch Berlin, and the streets were slick with rain and debris from last night's bombing. His coat, damp and heavy, clung to his body as he moved through alleys that twisted like the veins of a living organism. Every corner, every flicker of movement could hide a danger. Yet, he walked with the poise of someone who had rehearsed this 1,000 times in his mind. His target lay deeper within the Nazi hierarchy, the Reich Security Office in the heart of Berlin. To reach it, he had to cross the patrol-heavy district near the Tiergarten, a labyrinth of checkpoints and armed guards. The spy had memorized every detail from weeks of observation, but memorization was only the beginning, improvisation was survival. A patrol car rolled down the street, its tires hissing on the wet cobblestones. He pressed himself against a wall, breathing shallow, watching the shadow of the officer's helmet pass by. The patrol slowed, turned, and continued. He exhaled, releasing tension he hadn't realized he was holding, and pressed onward. Inside the Reich Security Office, the air was thick with the smell of paper, ink, and cigarette smoke. Officers moved briskly, unaware of the shadow slipping between their ranks. He had disguised himself as a logistics officer, complete with forged papers and a fake identification badge. His uniform fit, but he knew it was only a temporary shield. The wrong gesture, a misplaced salute, could unravel everything. He paused before a massive oak door labeled Hauptabteilung 3, Intelligence Division. Beyond it lay the files he needed: blueprints, personnel lists, covert operations, and more. Each document he could secure would provide Allied forces with intelligence worth millions in lives. He adjusted his gloves and slipped inside, silently closing the door behind him. Inside, the office was a maze of desks, filing cabinets, and officers bent over ledgers. His eyes darted across the room, noting the positions of guards, the timing of each officer's movements, and the location of a small elevator that led to the upper floors. The documents he sought were kept in a locked cabinet near the rear, under the watchful eyes of a lieutenant with a reputation for suspicion. The spy crouched behind a desk, pulling a set of lock-picking tools from his coat. Every second ticked like a hammer against his ribs. The lock clicked open with a subtle resistance, and he removed the files, sliding them into a waterproof bag he carried. His heart raced, but his face remained impassive. As he began photographing the contents with his miniature camera, the door creaked. He froze, listening. Footsteps approached, slow and deliberate. The lieutenant had returned unexpectedly. The spy flattened himself behind a filing cabinet, barely daring to breathe. The lieutenant paused at the cabinet, glancing at the open lock. "Did someone leave this?" he muttered, reaching down. The spy held his breath, counting the seconds. By some miracle, the lieutenant's attention was diverted by a document on his desk, and he moved on, muttering under his breath. Once the danger passed, the spy exhaled slowly, securing the last files. But the mission was far from over. He had to exit the building without drawing attention, and then navigate back to a secondary safe house before reinforcements could be mobilized. The streets outside were quiet, almost unnaturally so. He moved with calculated steps, avoiding pools of light and scanning rooftops for potential snipers. Each shadow could hide a threat, each alley could conceal an ambush. And somewhere above, the Gestapo's surveillance network pulsed like an invisible heartbeat, waiting for a mistake. Halfway to the safe house, he noticed a figure leaning against a lamppost, a man in civilian clothes, smoking a cigarette. Something about him felt wrong. The spy slowed, pretending to tie a boot, observing. The man's eyes were sharp, scanning the street like a predator. And then, almost imperceptibly, he shifted his gaze directly toward the spy. Panic rose, but he forced himself to remain calm. This was no ordinary observer. His instincts screamed that the man could be a counterintelligence agent, perhaps alerted to the theft earlier. Every choice now mattered. One false move, and weeks of preparation, months of planning, could collapse in an instant. He ducked into a narrow alley, moving quickly and silently, his mind calculating every possible route. The man followed, but at a distance, giving the spy a chance to escape. He remembered a secondary passage through a collapsed building, a shortcut leading to a back entrance of the safe house. He sprinted, feeling the wet bricks underfoot, the weight of the stolen intelligence pressing against his chest. The alley opened into the remnants of a bombed-out factory. He paused to catch his breath, listening. No footsteps, only the distant rumble of patrol cars and the occasional barking of a guard dog. He pressed on, climbing over debris, ducking under beams, and finally reaching the back entrance of the safe house. Inside, he dropped the files on a table and lit a lamp. The documents were intact, photographs taken, and the codes deciphered in preliminary review. He allowed himself a brief moment of relief, but it was fleeting. He was still in Berlin, still exposed, and someone was undoubtedly aware that a shadow had passed through the Reich security office. As he unpacked the files, a soft knock echoed through the room. His hand immediately went to the pistol at his hip, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Who's there?" he called, voice steady. A familiar voice replied, low and urgent, "It's me. Schmidt. I brought the secondary documents." He relaxed slightly, recognizing his contact. Schmidt was a member of the underground network, a local resistance agent who had risked everything to assist Allied intelligence. Together, they began sorting the documents, cross-referencing the stolen intelligence with information already known. Every match, every discrepancy, painted a more complete picture of the enemy's plans. But even in the dim light, the spy could feel the tension lingering, like a storm cloud on the horizon. He knew the next steps would be even more dangerous. Extraction from Berlin, ensuring the intelligence reached Allied hands, and staying alive while moving through a city teeming with enemy agents. Night gave way to early morning, and the spy remained vigilant, scanning windows, listening for footsteps, and mapping the city in his mind. Berlin was alive, aware, and unforgiving. And he, a single shadow, had dared to cross its heart. By midday, plans for the next phase were underway. Routes were mapped, contingencies prepared, and signals arranged with Schmidt. The city was a chessboard, and he had just moved a piece that could change the game. But every move carried risk, and the shadow had no allies but the night itself. As he prepared to leave the safe house for the second phase of the mission, he paused by the window, looking out over the city. Smoke rose from distant buildings, searchlights cut through the fog, and Berlin moved relentlessly toward its own fate. And somewhere in the distance, he knew, someone had noticed the shadow. The war was far from over. And in the heart of Berlin, the spy without a name had only just begun to play the deadliest game of his life. The edge of betrayal. Berlin's skyline had transformed into a jagged silhouette under the harsh afternoon sun. Smoke rose from bombed districts, painting the sky gray. Every rooftop, every shattered window, seemed to whisper warnings. The spy moved quickly, keeping to shadows, using rooftops and hidden corridors he had mapped during reconnaissance. Each step was measured, deliberate, because one miscalculation could be fatal. Schmidt had provided intelligence indicating that a high-ranking officer, Colonel Weber, would be transporting sensitive communications through the city that afternoon. These documents were critical, revealing troop movements, encryption keys, and a secret operation planned for the next week. The spy's mission was no longer mere theft, it was sabotage at the highest level. As he approached the designated rendezvous point, he noticed subtle changes in the environment: a crate that wasn't there before, a lamppost slightly shifted, and faint boot prints in the mud. Someone had anticipated his arrival, though he couldn't yet determine who. The city had grown more dangerous in hours, each shadow a potential trap. Crouching behind a collapsed wall, he observed Colonel Weber's convoy from a distance. 3 armored cars, each flanked by guards, moved slowly through the streets. The spy calculated timing and angle, knowing that intercepting them on the ground was too risky. Instead, he climbed to a nearby rooftop, surveying the route, and prepared a precise plan. He carried miniature explosive devices, calibrated for silent detonation. His goal was not to kill but to immobilize, creating confusion long enough for the documents to be retrieved. Every detail had been rehearsed in his mind, yet the unpredictability of human behavior made it tense. Even a minor misstep could lead to disaster. As the convoy approached, a sudden movement caught his eye: a shadow moving with unusual speed along the street. It wasn't part of the convoy, and it wasn't Schmidt. Instantly, the spy recognized the danger: a counterintelligence operative, someone sent specifically to intercept him. The operative spotted him almost immediately, eyes narrowing. The chase began. He sprinted across the rooftops, leaping gaps between buildings, the city beneath him like a maze of steel and rubble. Bullets ricocheted off walls and metal beams, the sound deafening, echoing across Berlin's damaged streets. With a swift, calculated move, he deployed one of the devices near a support pillar along the convoy's path. A muffled explosion jolted the street, sending soldiers scrambling for cover. Using the distraction, he slipped down into a side alley, merging with a small crowd of civilians who hadn't noticed anything unusual. Reaching the target vehicle, he retrieved the briefcase containing the communications. Hands trembling slightly, he examined the documents, confirming the sensitive codes, maps, and instructions. Each page he scanned mentally, committing as much as possible to memory. Schmidt would later coordinate extraction, but for now, he had to move before reinforcements arrived. As he navigated back through Berlin's chaotic streets, a sense of unease grew. The operative from earlier had not given up the pursuit. Footsteps echoed behind him, precise and unrelenting. He ducked into a narrow tunnel, the walls damp and lined with forgotten debris. Every breath felt heavy, weighed down by fear and adrenaline. Suddenly, a hand grabbed his shoulder from behind. Reflexively, he spun, striking the attacker with the butt of his pistol. The man slumped, but only momentarily. The spy realized in that instant he had been betrayed. Someone inside Schmidt's network had tipped off the counterintelligence agent. Betrayal cut sharper than bullets. He didn't have time to process it fully. Moving silently, he searched the fallen man's pockets, discovering a folded note. The words were chilling, "You won't leave Berlin alive." A friend. Whoever had written this knew him intimately and had access to critical intelligence. He pressed onward, moving toward a pre-arranged extraction point, a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Every shadow was a threat, every echo a potential trap. The betrayal forced him to adjust, improvising faster than he ever had. The city's familiar streets now seemed alien, each corner hiding enemies who knew his moves in advance. Reaching the warehouse, he found Schmidt waiting, visibly shaken. "They know," Schmidt whispered, eyes darting. "Someone inside gave your location away. We need to move, now." The spy nodded, handing over the briefcase. "We'll split. Meet at the river docks at dusk. Keep as many roads clear as possible." He then disappeared into the shadows, leaving Schmidt to secure the documents. The rest of the afternoon became a test of endurance and wits. He moved through abandoned subways, slipped past patrolling soldiers, and climbed rooftops, each move precise and calculated. Berlin itself seemed to conspire against him, alleys twisting, debris falling, and patrols appearing with uncanny timing. Finally, night began to fall. The spy reached the river docks, a maze of old cargo containers and warehouses. The city lights reflected in the water, casting long shadows. He waited, alert, sensing every movement, listening to every distant sound. Then, from the darkness, a figure emerged. Schmidt. He handed over a secondary briefcase, containing additional documents that had been intercepted before the first extraction. Together, they moved toward a hidden boat, moored beneath the largest bridge crossing the Spree River. As the boat drifted quietly down the river, the spy allowed himself a moment to breathe. The betrayal weighed heavily, gnawing at his mind. Someone within the Allied network had endangered the mission, almost costing him his life. But for now, the immediate danger had passed. Berlin receded behind them, smoke rising from its ruins, lights flickering, and the hum of war carrying through the night air. The documents were secure, but the spy knew the war in shadows had only intensified. He had crossed the lion's den, faced betrayal, and survived. Yet the price of knowledge was eternal vigilance, and Berlin's streets would remember the shadow that had dared to walk among them. As dawn approached, the spy sat silently in the boat, staring at the documents. Each page represented lives, strategies, and secrets. Each secret was a weapon, and each weapon could change the tide of the war. But the spy knew, in the quiet before daybreak, that the true danger was not in the city or even in the enemy's hands. The true danger lay in the shadows of betrayal, in those who wore the mask of friend, and in the invisible web of deception that surrounded him. Berlin had tested him. And the spy had survived. But the war was far from over. The final shadow. The dawn was a gray smear across Berlin's skyline, a city still smoldering from night raids and decades of oppression. Smoke curled from collapsed buildings, mixing with the faint scent of wet asphalt and gunpowder. The spy crouched on the roof of an abandoned factory near the river docks, observing the streets below with hawk-like precision. Every patrol, every shadow, every flicker of movement could mean death or discovery. The betrayal from the previous day weighed heavily on his mind. Someone within the Allied network had almost compromised the mission. Trust was now a weapon, and suspicion a shield. He had no allies he could fully rely on, except his own training and instincts. The target for today was the communications hub of the Reich Military Command, a heavily fortified compound guarded by multiple layers of security. This hub controlled the flow of intelligence across Berlin and beyond. The documents he now carried would expose secret troop deployments and Nazi operational strategies. Failure was not an option. He moved silently, slipping through alleys littered with debris, jumping over shattered walls, and crossing streets before searchlights could sweep across him. His uniform, carefully crafted from scavenged materials, allowed him to blend with low-ranking officers performing morning duties. Even the slightest anomaly could trigger alarm, so he mimicked every gesture, every step, every salute he had observed. At the edge of the compound, he paused behind a stack of crates. A small patrol passed by, boots clicking on cobblestones, eyes scanning for intruders. Timing was everything. He waited until they disappeared, then slipped into a shadowed entrance designed for maintenance workers, a forgotten passageway he had discovered days earlier. Inside, the hub was a labyrinth of corridors, humming machinery, and endless rows of filing cabinets. He moved like a wraith, avoiding officers and surveillance cameras. The objective was clear: plant the forged orders he had crafted based on the intelligence collected, then escape without leaving any trace. As he approached the central command room, he heard the soft click of boots behind him. He froze, blending into the darkness of a side corridor. A senior officer, unmistakable by the gold braid on his shoulder, appeared. This was Colonel Weber, the same man whose convoy he had sabotaged days earlier. The colonel's eyes scanned the room, and then he stopped, gaze locking onto the spy. There was no time for hesitation. With a swift movement, the spy activated a smoke device from his belt. A dense fog filled the corridor, reducing visibility to mere inches. Coughing, Weber stumbled back, shouting orders. The spy used the chaos to dart into the command room, placing the forged orders on the desk, swapping them with the originals he had secretly photographed. Suddenly, alarms blared. Red lights flashed, and the hum of machinery became chaotic. Someone had triggered the security override, someone who had been watching the hub closely. The spy realized the betrayal ran deeper than he had imagined. He was not only a target for the Reich but now for double-crossers within the Allied network. Using a side hatch, he escaped into the rooftop of the adjacent building. Below, soldiers ran in confusion, trying to locate the intruder. The spy moved with precision, leaping across gaps, descending fire escapes, and using the city itself as camouflage. Every heartbeat was amplified, every breath calculated. The line between survival and capture was razor thin. By midday, he reached the river docks again, where a small boat awaited. Schmidt was there, but the agent's face was taut with fear. "We've been compromised," Schmidt whispered. "They know everything, your movements, the documents, even your safe houses. You need to leave immediately." The spy handed over the forged orders and the photographs of the original intelligence. "We go tonight," he said. "No delays. The extraction point must remain unseen until the last moment." The night descended, and with it came Berlin's usual chorus of distant gunfire, barking dogs, and whispered warnings. They moved through shadowed alleys, avoiding main roads and patrols, each step bringing them closer to the river where a hidden barge would carry them out of the city. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness, a familiar silhouette. The spy's breath caught. It was the double agent, someone who had fed the enemy fragments of the mission. A tense standoff ensued, knives glinting, guns pointed. Words were exchanged, threats made, but trust was broken beyond repair. The spy moved first, disarming the betrayer with speed honed by months of training. The agent fled, disappearing into the labyrinthine streets of Berlin, leaving a faint echo of a warning behind. Finally, they reached the river. The barge waited, nearly invisible against the dark waters. They climbed aboard, and the spy looked back at Berlin, the city still alive with danger, still teeming with secrets, still oblivious to the shadow that had crossed its heart. The river carried them away slowly. The spy and Schmidt remained silent, minds occupied with the documents, the betrayal, and the knowledge that the war was far from over. Yet for a moment, relief washed over him, a fleeting, fragile sense of accomplishment. He had infiltrated the Reich, stolen their secrets, survived betrayal, and escaped a city that had once seemed impenetrable. But even as dawn approached on the horizon, he knew the war of shadows would continue. The documents were safe, but every secret carried a cost. Allies could turn enemies, cities could become traps, and the line between life and death was thinner than ever. The spy leaned back on the boat, watching Berlin fade into mist. His face, hidden beneath the hood of his coat, revealed nothing, but inside, a storm of thoughts raged. One mission had ended, but the war in intelligence, the silent battle of shadows, was eternal. For now, he was free. But freedom in Berlin was temporary. The shadow would return, unseen, unstoppable, and always ready to strike. The city would never know his name. Yet in the corridors of power, the ripple of his actions would be felt, a whisper across the Reich, a shadow across Berlin. And in the quiet of the river, the spy allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The night had tested him beyond imagination, but he had survived. He had outmaneuvered enemies, outwitted betrayal, and secured intelligence that could alter the course of the war. Berlin receded behind them, a city of fire, smoke, and secrets. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and more shadows to navigate. But the spy, unnamed and unseen, had crossed the line between fear and action. He had become the ghost the city would never forget.